Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mama Genius Hub podcast. Picture this. You've lived in it for so long. You've barely noticed it now. The story, the silence, the version of you that had to cope, had to stay quiet, to stay safe. But what if the very thing you buried is the key to your freedom? That's what Kath Essing discovered. After reclaiming her truth and rewriting her story, she stepped into a new kind of power. And now she helps other women do the same. If you've ever wondered, what if I could say it out loud? This episode will remind you you're not alone and your voice matters more than you know. We'll get started right after this. Mamas, welcome to the Mama Genius podcast, where real stories spark real transformation for moms ready to bring their visions to life. I'm Michelle DeKaiser, a mom of three, entrepreneur, and your biggest cheerleader if you've ever felt pulled to create something bigger, whether it's a business, a book, or a movement, but also felt the weight of daily life slowing you down. You are not alone. In just 15 minutes, we'll dive into insights, strategies, and real stories for women like you. Let's bring your visions to life, starting now. Kath Essing is an author, educator, and speaker dedicated to helping women reclaim their voice through this power of story. With over 15 years of experience, she offers trauma-informed workshops like shifting the narrative and developing the SHIFT framework to guide survivors through from reflection to action. Her latest book, The Courage to Speak Your Truth, blends poetry, I love that, and personal narrative to break the silence around childhood sexual abuse and empower others to rewrite their own stories. Welcome, Kath. We're so excited that you're coming up today.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited. There's so much to dive into with us, with women who, in general, how we just feel so muffled sometimes. And you can even feel your voice inside of you just constricting, and you want to say something, but then you stop yourself. And I'm so glad that you're here to help us show how we don't have to stop ourselves anymore, how to get that. So tell us a little bit about what's your why behind wanting to help women do this?
Well, I've had a beautiful life, and I'm very, very grateful for my life. But I've had a few bumps along the way, as we all have. And I was 23 years old, and it was like a tsunami of memories that came up for me after a spout of depression. And I remembered childhood sexual abuse from that I'd completely blocked out. So I then spent the next 23 years navigating the healing of that, realizing that when I was 46, I still hadn't spoken the words to police. So I had spoken to family, but I curated the story for their comfort more than my healing. And so the last few years, I've written a book and published it. And I've done that really because I did carry the silence for so long that I know how liberating it is now to be able to say the words out loud, as you said. So that's my mission, to help other people do the same.
I wrote this down and I have to reflect it back. I curate the story for their comfort, not my healing. I was just wow, how much as women we do that.
Yeah. And, I think there's a narrative that, we're not brave enough to speak up. We're not courageous enough. And it's not about that. It's, I think for most women in society, we're programmed to make things comfortable for other people. And I certainly was brought up in a generation where it was about being the good girl and people pleasing, which is also a trauma response. And so that is what I did. And I didn't realize until the last few years how much I'd been doing that. And, living with your own shame and your own story is heavy enough, but being responsible for other people feeling okay about that is just a burden no one should bear.
Wow, just when you I just felt like that all hit me so much, because it really does put the word people pleasing into perspective to why we do that. But it's really to make people around us feel comfortable, because,
Yes.
And then we don't express ourselves because we're trying to make others feel comfortable. It comes back to the question of, hi, how are you doing? Because we always answer, I'm fine, because no one really wants to hear the truth. But as a society, we've trained ourselves to do that. And I love that you're here to help us rewrite that and to share that narrative in a different way. And I know you have a shift framework as well. So how, as a mom who's listening to this may have just felt hit like I did, where should she start?
Well, I think if we explore the concept of there being three types of stories that shape us, and the first being our internal narrative. So this is where our beliefs sit. And so I guess for a long time, I carried the belief that it was my job to protect other people from this. And as a result of that, the curation sat between the story that I held inside of me and the story that I shared with others. So what I've come to understand is the gap between our internal story and the external story that we're sharing is really where our own peace resides. So if that gap is really large, then that means that we're further away from, our true selves. And so when we minimize that gap, then that's when we can have harmony within us. And we're the only ones who know that. That's the challenging thing. And that can be from not having a difficult conversation with a partner, or being worried about children and appearing that everything's okay. That gap can be there for various reasons.
And so you said there's three types of stories. What are the other two?
And the next one's the cultural. So if we have internal story, external story, and then the message, so it's the stories we're telling ourselves, the stories that we're sharing with other people, and then the stories that the world is sharing back to us. So, this happens in all sorts of ways. The statistics around how much more domestic chores women do in the home than men. It's about how many men are in leadership positions versus women. It's about the pay gap. It's about violence. And, these stories are being shared back to us constantly. And I think until, as mothers, until we reshape our own stories, we can't help our children get a new one. And I think that's the goal, really. It's like, how can we change the world? And we've got to do it by changing our own narrative first.
Oh, I love that. We'll talk about how to do that in just a moment. Are you a mompreneur who feels a fire to create something bigger, a business, a movement, a message, but you don't want to do it alone? That's why I've created the Mama Genius Hub, a space where your vision is nurtured, your voice is heard, and your dreams grow alongside a supportive community. Inside the hub, you'll get bite-sized insights and strategies in 15-minute sessions. A community of like-minded moms who truly get it. Support to bring your vision to life without burnout. If ready to build your business and impact while staying true to yourself, join us today at connectingmamas.com. Your calling matters. Let's grow it together. Now we're back. We were talking about the internal, the external, and the cultural stories. Now that we've identified the different types of stories, how do we start to reshape those stories?
So if you think about the word shift, and my book is about shifting my own narrative, which happened to be about my childhood sexual abuse, but these stories are various stories. So if we've got to begin by seeing the story. So if we think about the word shift as an acronym, and the first letter being S, then the first thing we've got to do is see. We've got to be aware of our perspective. So that's where we need to take a breath and recognize that our thoughts aren't real and that we can question them. And I think that it's a really simple concept, but it's not an easy one. and I'm still mastering this. So to be able to be witness to your own thoughts, that's where we must begin.
Oh, I love that, because you're really putting that into perspective, because it really does start with that awareness. And I loved how you brought up that cultural story. So when you think about those shifts, when you start identifying the ones you may have latched onto without even realizing it, but now that you're in awareness of maybe that statistic of women doing something less than men or stuff, then you can start to be, oh yeah, I was harping on that without realizing it. And so I love that first step of awareness. Then I'm assuming there's something with the rest of letters. So.
Absolutely. So the next step is here. So it's about being able to, we see how we reflect on how we see the world, and then we've got to hear our own belief before we can shift it. So we've got to hear it and then play with it and think, because sometimes those beliefs aren't actually ours that we're carrying. Sometimes that inner voice might be a parent or an abuser or a boss that treated us badly or a partner. And so we need to really distinguish what voice we're hearing and make sure that it's an empowering one and not one that's disempowering us.
That's so true. And I love that actually kind of shifted with the cultural aspect as well, because when you were looking at what voice are we hearing? and identifying which ones when it's someone else versus our own voice. And it really is, I love how you're saying that, because it's peeling off those layers to see what is that inner voice that you really want to listen to. And so what would the I be?
Well, the I is simply I, because I is about coming back to breath, coming back to self, and recalibrating. So it's see, hear, I, and then feel is like, where is this resonating within me? Like, where is this sitting in my body? Where is this? What is the feeling that I have? That's the emotion that I'm carrying. And then once we've identified what the way we're seeing the world, what kind of beliefs we're hearing, and where the I is that we want to come back to, the emotions we're experiencing, then we can actually talk and communicate effectively. So it's about navigating those first 4 steps before we can truly get clear on what we want to say.
Wow, I love that, how you just put that into, like, really like shifting that and put that into perspective of when we're in awareness, but then what do we do once we're in awareness? Because that's, I feel like when we're in awareness and all of a sudden we start the guilt and the blame, like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. And those are the first thoughts that come up. And I love how you're then saying, well, then play with those thoughts, because that might come up right away, but, and we're trying to get rid of the word, but, and when they come up, what can I do to play with them to shift that, literally shift in a different way, right? And then come back to that I.
Yeah.
And what is F feel, or was it something else?
F is feel. So that's the emotion. So, when we have thoughts, they then translate into feelings in our body. And sometimes the evidence that there's something there starts with our body. So it's interesting. We need to, and that certainly was the case for me. My body was heavy and I was carrying something that my mind hadn't caught up to. So if we're, spending time in a workplace or with a client, and there's a heaviness in our bodies that we can't quite make sense of, then the way we're seeing the world or what we're hearing isn't going to be relevant. So it's important to be able to kind of conceptualize all of what we're experiencing as a human being, in order to get really clear on what we need to say and whom we need to say it to. And in my experience, that conversation had to start with myself. It was the questions I had to ask me, and it feeds back into what's the gap between our internal and external stories. And certainly the cultural piece can come back, but we must get clear on that gap before we can really make any change externally.
And what's the last with T?
T is talk. T is, voicing our truth and being able to get really clear, firstly, about what's happening in our internal world, so that we can then externally communicate that with others. And in terms of trauma, I invite clients to write a letter. And in my case, the poetry in my book, as you mentioned, that was often me trying to process what I was seeing, what I was hearing, what I was feeling, and putting all of that into words. And so the talk piece didn't come till later, but the writing was the first step for me. It was about getting the words out on paper, and that really helped. So sometimes talking is just to a piece of paper, and you can burn it if you don't want anyone to see it, but it's about getting the words out and getting clear on what they are.
I love how you said that. When you were talking about poetry, it kind of hit me again. So I love poetry in terms of like using it to express, and it does come out in a different way. And I had this goal, I don't know, it was a couple months ago, to write a poem every morning. And then you reminded me, I haven't done that in a while. So something I want to return to, because I do feel that poetry is a good way to express subconscious ideas out in a different way that's not so conductive to like always, but also free writing is a great way to do that. To whatever suits you in terms of getting those words out, opening yourself up. I invite you to do that. Now, unfortunately, we're running out of time. So let's start by telling everyone how they can get a hold of you, and if you have a gift for us or anything like that.
Well, I have a book called The Courage to Speak Your Truth, and it is about my own personal story. But what I've found is it's actually a bridge between survivors and allies. So it's one of those stories that I think a lot of people are reading because they want to understand a sister or a friend or a mother or a husband who's been through a story like this. And I've been getting people tell me that there's a lot that they're learning about themselves through reading. We learn through stories. So that's on Amazon, and you can go to my website, which is bespeak.au, and all of my social handles are on there.
We're going to put you backstage to go through a couple takeaways and bring you back in just a moment. Wow, so much. Again, look what we can get done in 15 minutes as well. But let's talk about the takeaways, and really that first punch right there of that we have been curating our stories so that it is comfortable for the people around us rather than healing ourselves. Really take that one in, repeat that to yourself, see how it sits with you. And then that leads us into number 2, which is really looking at that narrative and being brave and looking at how we're programmed to do those types of things and how we're responding to other people and why are we people pleaser? Why are those things? And so looking at yourself in terms to decide what that is for you. And then looking at number 3, which is the 3 types of stories. We have the internal narrative, the external narrative, and then that cultural narrative that we may have not necessarily put into play, thinking about what are those things that you're telling yourself, because then that gives us into where we start to, number 4, start seeing and becoming that perspective and leading us into shifting how we're feeling. But then we'll go into breaking down with number 5, what is shift through her eyes, through which is number 1, shifting, which is seeing that story, right? Starting to be awareness of what is happening. And then number 2, actually hearing what is being said, how you're reflecting it, and starting to play with what was happening, right? When we start to play and start to realize that it starts to come through. And then we get into that I, which is really coming back to us, coming back to yourself, because it always starts with what is that authentic you inside of you that is being shut down, that voice, that people pleasing that might be. And then number 4 is what are those feelings? I mean, that heaviness, what feelings is blocking you or stopping you because your body is telling you something that it's holding on to, and being aware and starting to realize what you can lift, which is then takes you to the T, is being able to talk about it. And maybe it's talking with that piece of paper, maybe it's with that poetry, maybe it is with that friend, but really trying to express what that is inside of you. And so I'll bring Kath back up for your final takeaway.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me. And, you know, the truth is that we have a voice, and until women start speaking up, I think the noisiest voices will continue to be heard. So whether it's a whisper or it's a warrior scream, speak your truth because it matters.
Oh, I love that. On that note, I want us all to put that warrior scream out there and come together where we can share that voice collectively. So if you feel like you want that community, come to the hub. Thank you, Kath, so much for joining us today, and we'll all see you on the next episode. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
That's a wrap for today's episode, Mama. I hope you found something in these 15 minutes that sparked action towards your dreams. Remember, your purpose matters, your dreams are valid, and you are not alone. If today's conversation spoke to you, come join us at the Mama Genius Hub, where you'll find support, strategy, and sisterhood to turn your calling into real impact. Let's grow this together at connectingmamas.com. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. If this resonates with you, share it with another mompreneur who needs to hear this. We'll see you next time.